Who's ever heard that passage read at a baptism before? The beheading of John the Baptist? No? Okay, we thought we'd try something new this morning. We've been exploring some episodes from the early chapters of Mark, and it just so happened that today this was the passage. And it also happens to be Dorothy's christening, which is fantastic. We'll work with that. It's okay. A massive welcome to Dorothy and her whole family and friends and extended family. It's wonderful to have you all here to celebrate her and to celebrate her christening today, which we will be coming to later in this service. And in a way, what better person to focus on, I suppose, than John the Baptist? He was the original baptizer. John the Baptist was Jesus's good friend, Jesus's bravest witness and ambassador. He was the one who wriggled in his mother's womb when the unborn child Jesus came near in Mary's womb. He was the one who walked in the wilderness, baptizing people and preparing them for Jesus, proclaiming that Jesus was coming, that he's on the move. Then John was the one who baptized Jesus himself in the River Jordan. And then he was the one whose outspokenness landed him in a prison somewhere probably on the western shore of Lake Galilee at the palace of the local Roman ruler called Herod Antipas. And that's where we meet him today. But just for a moment, I want you to come back to the present and think of your family. Think of your family, your immediate family, your wider family, your distant family. Would anyone here say that their family is complex? Just raise a hand. I'm not going to ask any details, don't worry. Who would say that there's complexity? Are there dynamics, are there relationships in your family that are a bit complex, a bit delicate, a bit too difficult or perhaps too embarrassing to actually explain? Just raise a hand. I'm going to put my hand up for that. It's kind of the nature of family, isn't it, often? Probably quite a lot of us have complex family situations. So today, if that is you, I want you to make you feel really good about yourself and your family for just a moment. I am going to read something from a historian about the Herod family. This is a historian's summary, and I really love it. It's almost comical, this. And I've got a slide as well to help us keep on track. Can we get that slide up? Brilliant. So you can look at this slide too. So this is a quote from a historian. He says, "The marriage tangles of the Herod family are quite incredible, and their interrelations are so complicated that they become almost impossible to work out. When Jesus was born, Herod the Great was king. Herod the Great was married many times. Towards the end of his life, he became almost insanely suspicious and murdered member after member of his own family, until it became a Jewish saying, 'It is safer to be Herod's pig than Herod's son.' First, he married Doris, by whom he had a son, Antipater, whom he murdered. Then he married Mariam, the Hasmonean, by whom he had two sons, Alexander and Aristobulus, whom he also murdered. Herodias, the villainess of the passage that we've just read, was the daughter of this Aristobulus. Herod the Great then married another Mariam called the Boethusian, and by her he had a son called Herod Philip. This Herod married Herodias, who was the daughter of his half-brother Aristobulus, and who was therefore his own niece. By Herodias, this Herod Philip had a daughter called Salome, who was the girl who did the dancing in our passage. Herod the Great then married Malthake, by whom he had two sons, Archelaus and Herod Antipas, who is the Herod of our passage and who was the ruler of Galilee. Herod Antipas seduced Herod Philip's wife Herodias and persuaded her to leave her husband and marry him. Now note who Herodias was. A, she was the daughter of his half-brother Aristobulus, and therefore his niece. And B, she was the wife of his half-brother Herod Philip, and therefore his sister-in-law. To complete this astounding picture, Herod the Great finally married Cleopatra of Jerusalem, by whom he had a son called Philip the Tetrarch. This Philip married Salome, who was at the same time, A, the daughter of Herod Philip, his half-brother, and B, the daughter of Herodias, who herself was the daughter of Aristobulus, another of his half-brothers. Salome was therefore at one and the same time his niece and his grandniece. Seldom in history, this historian concludes, can there have been such a series of matrimonial entanglements as existed in the Herod family. And breathe. Wow. So hopefully you're feeling like your family is a little less complicated than you thought, given that picture. And in summary, John the Baptist has got involved with the wrong crowd. These are not people, this is not a family that you really want to be involved with. John had the courage to publicly rebuke Herod Antipas for marrying his sister-in-law / niece, and thereby got sucked into this crazy family's orbit and got spewed out the other end with his head on a silver platter. I mean, Game of Thrones, eat your heart out, right? I mean, this is crazy stuff. This is mental. Now, here's a question. In the middle of all that, while John was waiting to have his head chopped off, did he believe that things were still on track and leading to God's goals? It can't have been all that obvious to him. Some of us today, although I hope and pray that none of us will have our heads chopped off anytime soon, some of us today will be in the middle of things in our lives that are incredibly, perhaps almost unbelievably bad and painful and complex. Some of us today will be asking ourselves, how on earth can any of this be part of God's purposes? How is God anywhere in this? Well, the good thing is that you're not the first person to ask that, because I'm sure that John the Baptist was asking those kinds of questions too, as he sat in prison waiting to be beheaded. But now we can look back at his life and his witness and say that actually, yes, God's purposes were somehow at work through John. Excuse me. Even in spite of this needless and meaningless evil that was done to him to end his life. Perhaps I could get a glass of water up here. Thanks. I'll just turn my mic off for a second and clear my throat. So John was a witness to Jesus in the middle of this darkness and this pain. And he's a witness who still speaks to us today of God, that God's purposes are bigger than our own current sufferings. Nonetheless, it does seem clear from John's story that being Jesus' friend will not protect you from discomfort, from darkness, from tragedy, and ultimately from death. We die, don't we? We know that's going to happen to us. But the Christian message is that we don't need to be afraid of any of that. We don't even need to be afraid of death. And let me explain why. In Jesus, God, who is the source of everything, the creative and loving and good and beautiful maker of everything that exists, comes into the world in flesh and blood, in a human being. That's who Jesus is. And what does the world do to him? It kills him by execution on a cross. That is people's response to God. A big fat no, we don't want you around. No. But in his death, Jesus takes that decisive no, that rejection, and responds with a massive, death-defying yes from God. 3 days later, on the first Easter morning, Jesus rises from the dead. Death could not hold him. And that's not just a myth or a fairy tale. If you're willing to take the historical evidence seriously, and if you're willing to take the reality of God seriously, then it is clear. The tomb was empty, and Jesus was physically encountered alive multiple times by different people after his death. God's yes, God's acceptance, God's explosive love for people was bigger than our no, and bigger than death even. And now here's the crucial bit. Here's the bit without which all of that and all that we read in the New Testament is just kind of an interesting, if not rather baffling piece of history. Here's the crucial bit. Jesus' death and Jesus' resurrection was not just his. It was yours and mine. Writing to one of the very earliest Christian communities in Rome, the Apostle Paul puts it like this. He says, Christ died for the ungodly. While we were God's enemies, we were reconciled to God in the death of Jesus. And that's from Romans chapter 5. Excuse me. Paul is saying that Jesus' death was for, or on behalf of, other people. And not just any old other people, but for people who were not good people. Jesus' death was precisely for the ungodly, God's enemies, for bad people, for people who had rejected him, for the very people who killed him, and for you and me with all our faults and flaws and failures. Let me just say that again. Jesus has died for you. And that's why you don't need to be afraid of death, because your death has already happened. And I know that you are sitting here today alive, and if you're at home, I hope that you are sitting there, and I hope that you are alive. But I'm telling you, your death has already happened. Jesus has died it already on the cross. Not because you did anything to earn it, but just because you happen to be massively valued by the creator of the universe. He has died your death already. We know and experience death as an upcoming thing, something that awaits us all. But actually, from a Christian perspective, it's something that's behind us. As Paul goes on to say in Romans chapter 6, we died with Christ. And that means that the physical, biological death that happens to us all, while it is tragic, it is painful, and we are right to mourn and grieve when it happens, we can nonetheless look at it with hope. We can look at death as a step on our journey with God rather than as an end. Because the end has already happened. We died with Christ, Paul says. And now, he continues, we also live with him. Or as he also puts it in a letter to the Galatians, in chapter 2:20, he says, I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave himself for me. And that means that from a Christian perspective, you don't need to be afraid of death. So that when we look at a passage like this, we look at John's gruesome death, or Jesus' gruesome death, or our own death, as sad as we may be, we don't need to be afraid. Because if you're a Christian, you've died already. And this is actually symbolized and celebrated at a christening. Now, Dorothy's family, godparents, friends, really glad you're here. Don't get me wrong, I'm really thrilled that we're here to celebrate Dorothy's christening later. I really am. But you will notice a couple of peculiar things happening to Dorothy in a moment. Dorothy will have a cross marked on her head, a death symbol. And then we'll probably all clap. Now, if someone came up and made a mark of a noose or a gun over my baby's forehead, that would not be cool, right? You might even call the police if someone just came up and did that to you. But something equivalent to that is going to happen in this christening. And then to make it worse, Dorothy, poor thing, is going to get baptized. Baptized. In ancient Greek literature, when a ship is destroyed at sea, it is baptized. That's the word that they use. It's sunk, it's engulfed by the water, it's gone. That's what the word baptism literally means. And that's what's going to happen to Dorothy. She's going to get sunk, and we're all going to clap afterwards. So what is going on here? What is this crazy celebration of death? Well, these symbols that we're going to use of cross and of baptism, with those symbols, we're going to acknowledge that Dorothy, bless her sweet little cotton socks, has died. Her death has been done already by Jesus. She's died with him, and now she can leave this building and get on with living with him as Jesus' friend and part of his family. Now, I'm probably going to wrap up in a minute, so why don't I ask the band to come up? If you're a Christian, you're involved in that too. If you're not a Christian, you're welcome to get involved in that. You're welcome to die with Dorothy and others in this building. If you're a Christian, you've died already. Jesus has died for you. It's done. And you're now free. And your simple job is to get on with the daily task of living with him, faithfully witnessing to him like John did, and enjoying his company and his love through the ups and the downs of life. Because we all know there will be and there are ups and downs in life. Don't expect life with Jesus to be a life of ease and comfort and riches or health or pleasure. Just look at John. That's not what this is actually about. But in the face of life's difficulties and in the face of death, the risen Jesus is the best companion there is. And the fact that people rejected God in Jesus killed him, and yet he uses that rejection to accept us and destroy our death, shows that he is a good friend. He is a kinder judge than we are to ourselves. It shows that he has purposes bigger than our pain and our sufferings. And it shows that his friendship will last even beyond our physical death. Jesus is a very good friend to have. So I encourage you to stand. We're going to have some music and some words that you can hum along to. So this is a time to enjoy his friendship. If you're already a friend of Jesus, enjoy it. Welcome him. Spend some time with him. Speak to him as you would speak to a friend now. If this is all something that's slightly strange and new to you, that's okay as well. I'd be really happy to pray with you afterwards or talk with you if you want to explore any more of this. But I'd encourage everyone now to use this time to acknowledge who Jesus was and is. A good friend, the one who died your death for you. Let's spend some time in his presence.